Hey, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Grandpop coming to you from underneath the Beach Boulevard ICW Bridge. Just went for a very nice 2.5 mile hike. Did a loop going across the bridge and back. I'm doing the second video today in the Live Free series. It's going to be 3 videos in all. There's a lot of information to get to today, so I'm going to dive right in. We're going to look at how we're controlled and what we can do about it. Now, there's 2 things that the government and big business and all kinds of powerful people use to ensure that they have their freedom, but you go along with them. And sometimes that turns out well, and sometimes it doesn't. So how are we controlled? We're controlled through censorship. What is censorship? It's the suppression of words, images, or ideas that are offensive. It happens whenever some people succeed in imposing their personal, political, or moral values on others. So, I don't like what you're saying, and what you're saying might be really horrible. I don't like what you're saying, so you're not allowed to say it. And by saying you're not allowed to say it, then even if it's not horrible, if it fits the parameters, you're not allowed to say it. And there's always been a lot of censorship. It never was as out in the open as it is now, because we can instantly communicate with each other. Back when Jesus walked the earth, most people didn't go more than 15 miles from where they were born in their entire lives. They went everywhere on foot, and the only communication they had, for the most part, they could read, but they didn't have books. The only communication they had was to verbally go up to somebody and talk to them. Then eventually people rode horses, and then they rode motorized vehicles. There were telephones, telegraphs, and now there's just a zillion ways to communicate, and 10 years from now, I'm sure there'll be 2 zillion ways to communicate. So it's covered, as I said, it's carried out by pressure groups and the government, quite often businesses, people that have an agenda, quote unquote. Now, what goes hand in hand with censorship is propaganda. Propaganda is information that one party wants you to get so that you agree with them. And it's used all the time by governments. It's used by tyrannical governments, but it's also used by democratic governments all over the world, and it has been for time immemorial. Propaganda isn't the truth. Now, in any successful propaganda, there's going to be a kernel of truth, a little tiny kernel of truth. There's going to be some anecdotal evidence and circular reasoning. A lot of circular reasoning. Not going to get into what those are. Go to my series on logical fallacies. It's a 2-point series that I did recently, and check out what those things are. Now, Governments often send out propaganda to galvanize people and motivate them to do something like, oh, I don't know, go to war with another country, and that other country has leaders who have propagandized their citizens and galvanized them so they want to go to war against us. Trust me, the leaders, the people in power, they're not sending their children to war. A long time ago, kings went to war. And even in the Civil War, I don't know necessarily that generals went to war, but high-ranking officers were out there with their men. But now everything happens remotely. And even if it didn't happen remotely, nobody in the ruling class is sending their children to fight in other wars. It's us. It's the common people who get sent out there to fight these endless wars that just keep going on, and nothing is solved. So, what's an extreme example of this? I'm going to give you the most extreme example, and it's from a book that I read, and I took a lot of grief for reading this because my girlfriend Judy was Jewish, and I had the book in the house, and she said, oh, what if my dad saw this? And I said, I've always wanted to know why this man was so horrible. Maybe it's in this book. I want to read the book. And I read it, and he was horrible. In Mein Kampf, the book I'm talking about, Hitler explained an idea called the große Lüge. The große Lüge, the big lie. It's a lie that's so colossal that, let's see what he said, that no one would believe that someone could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Now, the big lie wasn't that the Jews were bad people. That was a lie. The big lie was that the Jews were the cause of all the problems in Germany. Germany had come out of World War I as the losing side. There were reparations that were imposed on them that were really, really stiff. They wanted to make sure that they didn't come back and build a big army and start another war, which they wound up doing anyway. So, but Hitler claimed that the technique had been used by Jews to blame Germany's loss in World War I on German General Erich Ludendorff, who was a prominent nationalist political leader in the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was the government just before Hitler got into the government. And then he used that conspiracy theory to other the Jews, and I talk about that in my logical fallacies videos. But what that means is to say that these other people are subhuman. You first say, well, they're different than me, and then you say they're inferior to me, and then you say they're not human. What resulted from that was known as, or is known as, the Holocaust. What happened during the Holocaust is the German people, who were civilized people, at least they had been, put the Jews into work camps and worked them almost to death. Some of them they did work to death to build Hitler's war machine. And then when they couldn't work anymore, they went, well, it's going to cost us to feed them and they can't work, so let's just kill them. So if you think that propaganda doesn't affect you, think about the everyday Germans who bought what was it called? The grosse Lüge, the big lie. Germans caused everything, or the Jews caused everything. And what did it cost for the world to put an end to this grosse Lüge? What was the cost to us? Well, we fought World War II, and the estimates of the death count of the Second World War generally range somewhere between 70 and 85 million people. It's horrible. Now, how's propaganda spread? Well, the first thing you have to do is to get it started. It could be something like the big lie. It could be a little lie. And it works hand in hand with censorship. If you can control the press and you can get the press to say only your side of the issue, that's part of it. So, that you can't see it, you can't hear it. It's the three monkeys: hear no evil, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Whatever those monkeys do, see no evil. And just because we have a free press, and in the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment is freedom of speech. And the press has freedom of speech. It's a bedrock of our society that the press can say anything that they want. Do they? Well, in World War II, the press put out all kinds of propaganda. Hollywood put out all kinds of propaganda. They called it the war effort, and my parents thought it was great. You go to the movies during the war, and there's these cartoons in the beginning, and they're showing us killing Hitler and all kinds of stuff. Like, woohoo! And Hitler was a bad guy. I'm not saying that he wasn't. He was horrible. So you get it started. And after you get it started, confirmation bias kicks in. Once again, go back to the logical fallacies videos and watch them. But confirmation bias just says that we don't look for information to get to the truth. We look for information to support what we already believe is the truth. And confirmation bias is so powerful, and you have to really guard yourself against it. I'll give you an example. Joseph Stalin killed something like 20 million of his own people. He was a horrible man. I think all in all, Stalin killed more people than Hitler. But Hitler and Stalin both had a lot of people who admired them and followed them. And what happens is, even if you know that something is wrong, you're going to separate your hero, in this case Joseph Stalin, from that. So there's a story about this common, comrade in Russia who hears that there are a lot of people being kidnapped and taken to the gulag and worked to death. And he says, oh, it's a shame that Comrade Stalin doesn't know about this, because if he did, he would do something about it. No, Comrade Stalin was doing it. But people don't want to see what they don't want to see. That's just how people are. The press has always been biased. It wasn't just in World War II when they were, on board with us declaring war on Germany. Now, Japan attacked us, and we declared war on Japan. They were allies with Germany, and Germany declared war on us, but so what? I don't think they were going to come over to New York City and start landing troops. The press can say anything they want to say. I have a little story here about why I stopped talking to the press. When we lived in Cape May Courthouse, there was a busy street, I think it was called Hand Avenue, that went from Route 47 to Route 9. And it might have been a 35-mile-an-hour speed zone. I used to jog on that road and stuff, and people went entirely too fast on it. There were kids playing in yards and stuff like that. Well, there was this story about this kid that was at the bus stop, but I don't know if there was an actual stop there. They were at the school bus stop waiting to get picked up and got hit and killed. So I was out jogging one day, and there was a newspaper reporter who came up and stopped me, which I don't like when people stop me while I'm running and say, well, you see that I'm running, right? But he stopped, hey, can I talk to you a minute? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm here to get the opinions of people about this tragic death. And I said, yeah, tragic. And he said, well, what do you think can be done about it? Do you think they should put up more signs? And I said, I don't know that signs will help. And he said, do you think that they should have the police here more often, that there should be more of a police presence? And I said, look, I was a cop in Philadelphia for 8.5 years. So I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. This is a fairly large township here, Middle Township. And they only have so many police officers. So if you take away from over here to go here, well, what's going to happen over there? So a cop has to try to get around to the entire area as often as he can. And yes, they'll say, oh, keep an eye on this area. But this was an isolated incident. And you can't just put up a bunch of signs. You'd have to put up signs up and down this entire road. Like it's just not something that's feasible. So no, I mean, there's nothing. It was a tragedy. And so, listen, I need to go running again. The guy said, thank you very much. Next time the paper came out, I took a look at it, and they had asked me my name. They said, Frank Clark from Dory Drive said that the police don't have a large enough presence there. And he said that I was a former police officer, that they should have more of a presence there. They're not patrolling that area enough, and they need a lot more signs. The two things that I said no, and he wanted that to be the solution. That was his solution. He was the big virtue signaling hero. Like, oh, I know how to fix this problem. Well, no, you don't. You're just some beat newspaper reporter. And the only way you can get your opinions across to everybody is to lie about my opinion. So that was why I stopped. Why I stopped talking to the press. I guess I would under certain circumstances, but I have nothing but disdain for the mainstream press. So how else do people control what you think, the information you get? you have the algorithms, the bots and the non-bots on social media, the human bots on social media, the red meat seekers on both the left and the right who are like like whatever. They believe exact opposites from each other, and the other side's always wrong, never does anything right, and they're both filled with conspiracy theories. And now we have AI on the horizon. I don't think it's really here yet. It's very sexy, the idea of AI. So yeah, people going like, oh yeah, this is AI. I don't think that the potential of AI has been realized even 1% yet. Boy, oh boy. You could have a lot of propaganda and censorship built right into it. So somehow we have to build into it what the founding fathers built into our system of government. And that's that our constitutional rights are baked into it. Baked into it. So how is propaganda dissipated as it worms its way through society? Well, if you're an American citizen, read and know the Constitution, especially the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble peaceably. And study the Constitution. Study what scholars have said about it. Look at Supreme Court decisions. Know what your rights are. When I was a cop, I'd grab somebody and they'd go, oh, you can't lock me up. I know my rights. And I would say, look, if you know your rights, it's because you were just locked up. You don't know your rights. I guarantee you couldn't pass a quiz on what your rights are. You should know your rights. You're battling an awesome foe to acquire and keep freedom. Freedom isn't free. You have to work for it every day. And this is the battle. Study history broadly, deeply, and openly. And here's another one. This is anecdotal, but trust me, there's a lot of truth in it. Cast a jaundiced eye on anything said by somebody who takes a limo to work. If they take a limo to work, they have no idea what you deal with every day. Who takes a limo to work? All these news people on TV, whether they're on the left or the right, politicians, all these people that know the best for us. They know the best for them. They have a lot of freedom. Don't let them take yours. So cast a jaundiced eye on what they say. Another thing that has happened over the last maybe 15 years is citizen bloggers. We have so many truths that are coming out in this day and age because people have said, I don't trust the left or the right media. I want to find out for myself. And then when they find out for themselves, they say, I want to share this with people. And the next thing you know, they have podcasts. There's a podcast I watch from time to time called Tim Pool, and the guy decided he wanted to be a reporter, and he just went around the world and covered stories for himself. So look broadly for your information and study history. But not just deeply and broadly and openly. Make sure that you look at it from different perspectives. the victor writes the history. Well, yeah, but sometimes the loser has their version in print too. So look at them both. Don't just take the perspective of especially what the government wants you to believe, whether that government's run by the left or the right. Always cast a jaundiced eye at what the people in power who have freedom are telling you, whose freedom is tenuous every day. So how do you study history? The first place you want to look is the Bible. The Bible lays out a history of freedom from the creation of the world up to the present day. Take advantage of the wisdom that's in the Bible. Set aside the supernatural. Set aside whether Jesus is God or Muhammad is God or what. Read the Bible for the wisdom that's in it. Let's take a look at some of that. In Egypt, there was no word for freedom or liberty. There was just Pharaoh. Pharaoh ruled everything. And then Moses was born, and he led the children of Israel out into the wilderness and got them to the promised land, but not in it. And the law was laid out to him. And in that law, God ruled everything. But rights were preserved in the law. Now in Egypt, that didn't happen. In current day Egypt, they have laws like every other modern country. But back then, Pharaoh was king. If he wanted to, he could just have you killed. That wasn't true under the Ten Commandments and those laws that sprang from them. Then next, you have Persia. That was one of the countries, the empires that butted heads with the Israelites. And they gave some sovereignty to their conquered people. They would allow them to worship the gods, their gods. And in some of these situations, they'd say, oh yeah, we'll take your gods and you take our gods and we'll all live happily ever after. Now, Assyria, another country that you run into in the Bible, what they did is they would conquer a people and then take some of them and move them here, and some and move them over there, and some over here. So they would dissipate the societies into Assyria in general. And they would take away their national sovereignty that way. Babylon, they kidnapped the children of Israel and just took them up to Babylon. They left some in Jerusalem and in Judah. Israel and Judah were the two parts of the Holy Lands back then. But they kidnapped them and just took them to their place, and they didn't really have any rights. It wasn't until the Persians took over that they had a chance to go back and rebuild the walls of the city. And then you had Greece. That was the intertestamental period into the New Testament period. Well, in Greece, all citizens had rights. And Socrates was from Greece, and according to J. Rufus Fears, he was the wellhead of our entire tradition of freedom of inquiry. Freedom of inquiry is very, very important. It's the right to ask questions. No matter who's telling you something, you have the right to go, prove it. Prove it, buddy. And you had Plato and Aristotle. So there was a tradition of freedom in Greece. So if you see what's going on here, by the time the New Testament happens, you have Greece and Rome. We'll talk about Rome in a second. And so the Christians are now dealing with these empires. And it's much different than, say, Babylon or Egypt, a couple thousand years before then. Rome, that's where we got our republican ideas. So Greece was a democracy and Rome was a republic. They both became empires. Republic is sharing of power. A pure democracy is people get to vote on everything. And that always devolves into tyranny. Because people go like, yeah, that guy has something that I want. And if you get more than 50% of people saying, yeah, let's take away everything that guy has and give it to us, then it's not going to turn out good for that guy. And then we have Jesus, who was born into this world. And he gave you the possibility of having individual freedom from sin and death. Let's go further into history, past biblical times. You have Britain, the Magna Carta, common law. These are things that our founding fathers used to help establish our country. Republican ideas from Rome, democratic ideas from Greece, common law and Magna Carta from our mother country, England. You had France right around the same time we had our revolution against Britain. They had a revolution. Ours, yeah, there was a war fought, but we came to terms at the end of it. France had a bloody revolution, and it wound up with the tyranny of Napoleon, the emperor. That didn't happen with us. And there's a reason why. You need to be looking at these things. You need to be figuring out why all these people in France bought into this idea. And I'm sure it was tried in the United States, but nobody here did. We were limiting the power of the people who have freedom and have the ability to either infringe on our freedom or allow us to be free. And then you have in America the Declaration of Independence. Read that, know what's in it. Once again, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, part of the Constitution. The tripartite government. These are all things that are set to balance out powerful people so that we don't get tread on by them. Study great leaders, people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Winston Churchill. I talked about Jefferson and Lincoln in my most recent video called "If Your Heroes Are Perfect, They Aren't Human." They were definitely not perfect people. Jefferson had slaves, but he was against slavery. Now you have to wrestle with that. You're going to go to school and they may or may not talk about Thomas Jefferson, but whatever they say about him, in school quite often is how people are propagandized. You have to study for yourself. I know what I believe about Abraham Lincoln. He freed the slaves, but he didn't believe that blacks and whites were equal, and he didn't believe that blacks and whites should be able to marry. If Abraham Lincoln was president now, he wouldn't believe that I should be able to marry your grandmother. But he freed the slaves. So you have to look at these things from every angle, up and down. Study what these great leaders said and what they wrote, not what somebody else said they said or said they wrote. Go right to the source. Somebody will tell you, oh yeah, Thomas Jefferson was horrible. He did blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe he was horrible. Find out. And you can read those things, he said, she said kind of things. But back it up by reading, looking at footnotes. Footnotes in life are very, very important. When you're trying to form an opinion and you're reading something scholarly and it has footnotes, go to the footnotes. Vet them. Find out if what the person is gleaning from that source document is correct. And definitely go to the person, to that person's writings. All these people in history wrote. George Washington, in his farewell address, warned us about getting involved in foreign conflicts. And yet we constantly get involved in foreign conflicts to our detriment. Another president, one who you may never have even heard of, was Dwight David Eisenhower. He was a general during World War II. He was the general that landed the troops at Normandy, the turning point of the war, I would say. And in 1961, on January 17th, he was getting ready to turn the government over to John F. Kennedy. And he gave his farewell address. So he was a general. Before World War II, the U.S. didn't have much of a standing army. Eisenhower said this, and it's a little bit lengthy, but it's worth... I tried to cut some of it out, and I couldn't. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. So he's warning us that we could lose freedom, that political freedom to vote for who we want to be in power. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. So we'd get attacked by somebody, and automobile companies would make tanks, and commercial airline companies would make fighter planes. But we didn't have those industries. By the time he was giving this speech, that was changing. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations, which is a lot of money. It was a lot of money back then, and I'm sure it's no better today, the ratio. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. So he's saying, yeah, the world has gotten scarier, so we need to be able to build arms even during peacetime. But boy, is it a horrible thing to put that much power into these industries. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and a knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Very, very hard balancing act, security and liberty. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. So not only are we building all these military weapons, but we also have a research complex that is in bed with the federal government. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocation, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet, in holding scientific discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. Boom. Drop the mic there, Ike. That's what they should have called him. Drop the mic, Ike. That was his nickname, Ike. Dwight David Eisenhower. Drop the mic, Ike. He nailed it. He saw what's going on today, even though it was 1961. The military-industrial complex and big education still exist. Now they're joined with big pharma, big agriculture, big healthcare, and they stay in power. The lobbyists in Washington, D.C. on K Street, that's the lobbyist street, they fund political campaigns. And what do they get by funding these campaigns? And sometimes they fund both sides. If some pharmaceutical company gets you elected and they say, we want the law about this drug to be this, bingo, it's going to be that. Doesn't matter if that's the correct thing. Doesn't matter if that's what the people want. These folks are in charge. The donor class. They're the new oligarchs. You know, we went to Iraq and fought a war there and Afghanistan, and there were these oligarchs, these tribal leaders. We're involved in a war now in Ukraine. between the oligarchs of Ukraine and the oligarchs of Russia. But we have oligarchs too. People in power, the lobbyists, the donor class. We're in an empire now. It's just the truth. I mean, I'm not saying, hey, it's a good thing or a bad thing even. We are an empire. We're the American empire. What do the successful empires that inspired freedom, to a certain extent, talking about Greece, Rome, even Persia to some extent, but Greece, Rome, the British Empire, what do they have in common? They have a right to bear arms. Citizen soldiers. You know, we have the National Guard and the reserves. That's the way things should be. If we would stop going to war different places, if we could stand down most of our full-time army, these empires started to unravel when they had standing armies, when it wasn't the actual citizens going out to fight. Because if you and your neighbor are going out to fight a battle, you really feel you need to do it. But when you start hiring people to fight your battles, you don't care. And who gets hired to fight the battles around the world? Rich people's kids? No. Another thing is property rights. People scoff at property rights in the United States today, but it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was originally life, liberty, and property. And most of what they consider the pursuit of happiness is to be able to acquire property. So you need these things. Citizen control of the government. Reasonable taxes. These are the things that we want our government to have. Well, to be limited to. Reasonable taxes. Citizen property rights. Not having a standing army so they can send you around the world whenever. We go to war now. We don't even have Congress declare war. It's just like, yeah, we're going to go over here and bomb people. Every time we drop a bomb, some rich person gets richer. Trust me. They have all the freedom they need. But it's us who have to worry about our freedom every day. So next time, we're going to talk about how to live free. Until then, peace out.